2020 hearing, September 10th, 2019 at 6:30.
Mayor Troopman,
Here.
Vice Mayor Samaria,
Here.
Commissioner Johnson Sadella,
Here.
Commissioner Tudor,
Here.
Commissioner Wise.
We're going to stand for the pledge, but afterwards, if you could please remain for standing for the pledge for a moment of silence. Thank you. Vice Mayor, will you lead us off, please?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please remain standing. Thank you. Our hearts go out to our neighbors in the Bahamas who withstood the catastrophic impacts of Hurricane Dorian, a Category 5 storm that was stationary over the Bahamas for 2 days. I also wish to extend my thoughts to the residents living in the towns and cities all along the eastern U.S. and Canada who were impacted by this storm. And finally, I wish to remember the lives lost and affected in New York City's tragedy on September 11, 2001. We will all have a moment of silence. Thank you. In honor of those victims. Thank you. You may be seated. This evening's commission, I'm just going to repeat, if you have not already done so, please sign in with the village clerk if you wish to speak on these 2 items. This evening, the commission is holding 2 public hearings on first readings of 2 ordinances. The first is an ordinance to set the fiscal year of 2019-2020 millage rate at 9.7. The second ordinance is for the purpose of adopting the village's budget for fiscal year 2019-2020. Tonight is one of 2 sets of public hearings. The final hearings and passage of the budget and millage will take place on September 20th. During this evening's public hearings, the public will have an opportunity to comment on these 2 specific ordinances only. Our regular commission meeting will follow these public hearings, and comments on those specific agenda-specific items and general good and welfare should be made at that time. The attorney will read the ordinance, and we will take public comments on each ordinance. Attorney Rodriguez, please read the decorum rules and then ordinance 2019-03.
All comments must be addressed to the commission as a body and not to individuals. Any person making impertinent or slanderous remarks or who becomes boisterous while addressing the commission shall be barred from further audience before the commission by the presiding officer unless permission to continue or again address the commission is granted by the majority vote of the commission members present. No clapping, applauding, heckling, or verbal outbursts in support or in opposition to a speaker or his or her remarks shall be permitted. No signs or placards shall be allowed in the commission chambers. Please mute or turn off your cell phone or pager at the start of the meeting. Failure to do so may result in being barred from the meeting. Persons exiting the chamber shall do so quietly. Ordinance 2019-03 for first reading, an ordinance of the Village Commission of the Village of Biscayne Park, Florida, establishing the fiscal year 2019 to 2020 millage rate at 9.70 mils for each $1,000 of assessed valuation upon real and personal property within the village limits of the Village of Biscayne Park, providing for an effective date.
Thank you. We will now open the floor for public comments relating to ordinance only, ordinance 2019-03 for setting the millage rate at 9.7. Madam Clerk, please call the first. No public comments? Please go ahead. Don't forget to state your name and address, please.
I didn't forget. Fred Jonas, 918 119th Street. This is a millage rate that we've had for several years now. It's sort of unclear why it doesn't change. The millage rate doesn't really mean anything. The number of dollars is not the same from one year to another. It's just sort of like a superstition. But I want to point out to you that every year for quite some time, the village has had less revenue than it needs to accomplish the important goals of a municipality. This year we have a unique problem, which is that our legal bills are through the roof. So we have much greater expenses than we normally do, and I would urge you not to set the millage rate at 9.7, I think you do yourself a big disservice and you place yourselves at a huge disadvantage, and us, unless you have a millage rate of 10, which is the highest you can go. That won't solve the problem either, but at least because of the needs we have and what this commission has done to the legal expenses of the village, we can't function like this.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, if you don't mind putting up the clock, thank you very much. Any other public comments? None here? Before we open up the commission for comments from the commission or staff, Finance Director Winklejohn, could you please come to the podium and discuss the following two items?
Yes, good evening. As you've been presented, the resolution before you has the repeat, and the comment was relevant to that, of the 9.7 millage rate. Also within the ordinance will be the rollback rate, which is as the property value goes up, you would gain more value, so the truth in millage requires that we calculate and show the actual increase in taxable income.
I just want to state it for the public. I know you already know why you're doing what you're doing, but
Yeah,
I'd appreciate, just for the public's sake, if I can go ahead and read that. Just me one moment.
Oh, I thought you already did.
No, I didn't. But thank you. First, please explain the reason for percentage increase in millage over the rollback rate needed to fund the proposed budget. Secondly, please explain the reasons ad valorem tax revenues are increasing per Florida statute 200.065, subsection 2E1. Thank you.
Yes, I started to answer that. I thought you'd already read that in the intro. So back to the point, was your 9.7 millage rate, of course, was what was proposed by the commission. That 9.7 calculated against a new increase in total property value generates a little more money, about $100,000, $120,000. That needs to be explained and shown. If this commission had chosen not to increase taxes, there would be a rolled back or a lower millage rate, and that would have been about 918, something like that. I don't have it right in front of me, which is in the resolution. What was and is proposed is to keep the current millage rate, which increased, like I said. The reasoning behind all of it is fundamental. Your ad valorem rates are your recurring revenues. Those are revenues that you get generally every year with a small, usually no more than 3% potential reduction. In the physical requirements through the manager, the fiscal requirements through the manager and the department heads, their annual fixed recurring expenses had numerous increases through contractual obligations, through cost of living increases, etc. And obviously the CPI, which we dealt with, was a little over 3% again this year. If you add those changes alone, reducing the ad valorem below the 9.7, you would have to use reserves to fund recurring expenses. And I think most of us can understand that reducing your income below your expenses that are going to keep happening every year, you would be in a deficit funding every year. So it's appropriate for staff to recommend and myself to recommend that you retain the existing ad valorem level, the millage rate, and that you will also still be generating some reserves. At some point in time, at another meeting, we can discuss other options, but at this point, with no immediate refunding from FEMA, it would be inappropriate to recommend anything otherwise.
Thank you. With that, I'll open up the comments for the commissioners and our staff. None? Manager, do you want to make any comments?
No.
No? Okay. Vice Mayor.
One of the residents brought up 10. I don't agree with the 10, but what's the difference between the 9.7 and the 10?
That would be about 3%, so that's less than $300,000. I think it would be in the $30,000 range. It's not a lot. It's not as significant.
And if it goes below the 9.7, what's the difference?
It would not be. I think the symbolic impact of increasing your ad valorem would create problems in the future for other rollback issues. I think the history has been to suggest keeping it at least the same. in the current fiscal requirements, you wouldn't be able to lower it, so I believe that's why. But you can answer that as well as I could.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from our commissioners or staff? With none said, is there a motion to adopt ordinance 2019-03?
I so move.
Is there a second?
Second the motion?
Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Mayor Trumpman,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Samara,
No.
Commissioner Johnson Sardella,
Yes.
Commissioner Tudor,
Yes.
Commissioner Wise.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-1.
Mayor, if I may, this is first read, so
Yeah.
I propose a resolution memorializing the vote about the tentative millage rate for purposes of the final hearing. I think,
Speak up, can't hear.
yes, I propose a resolution memorializing the vote that was just taken as to approving a tentative millage rate for the final hearing. That's what's typically done.
Okay, so since that's typically done, is there a motion to go ahead and pass a resolution for the tentative millage rate being set at 9.7 for the first reading of ordinance 2019-03?
I so move.
Is there a second?
I second.
All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes 5-0. This concludes, sorry, doing two things at once here. This concludes the first reading of item 4A for ordinance 2019-03 to tentatively pass the village's millage rate at 9.7. The commission will now open the second public hearing of the first reading of ordinance 2019-04 for the purposes of adopting a tentative budget for fiscal year 2019-2020. Attorney Rodriguez, please read the ordinance.
Ordinance 2019-04 for first reading. An ordinance of the Village Commission of the Village of Biscayne Park, Florida, adopting a budget for fiscal year 2019 through 2020 for the Village of Biscayne Park, Florida, providing for conflicts, providing for severability, providing for an effective date.
Thank you. The commission will now open the second public hearing for the first reading of the ordinance. Prior to reading, the commission's held two workshops. I'm so sorry, guys. I'm not feeling well. Okay, try again. I'm going to open the floor to to public comments for this ordinance. Clerk, could you please go ahead and read the people who would like to make comments on this?
Ross.
Thank you. Rox Ross, 11166 Griffin Boulevard. The many contingencies that are spread out throughout this budget raise flags for me. They come to a total of over $128,000. And they're found in administration, police, code, PW, rec, as well as in the overall summary page. It's confusing. It's hard to figure out what exactly that money is going to be used for. And one of the things that it is pointed to is a $30,000 earmark project, capital improvement project at the rec center that was once on an agenda but pulled off and never discussed by the commission. But more worrisome for me is the CITT audit and the potential exposure that I recently wrote to the manager about and copied all of you. I'd like to know, show of hands please, how many of you knew about that CITT audit before I sent you a copy? Only one of you knew about the audit before I sent you a copy. So you've gone through these workshops and you've talked about the budget, but nobody's talked about CITT saying there's a fund deficiency of $240,000 in the CITT fund. And they're asking for an explanation. I've asked the manager to give me copies of the response through a public records request, but I haven't seen that yet, so I believe that response hasn't been made and it's quite overdue. I found the report last week on the CITT website, and what they're saying is that the village couldn't provide documentation for that $240,000 over a span of 10 years. So we know the money's not missing. It's properly accounted for in the actual village audits. And we know that because the auditors gave the village a clean audit there weren't any issues. But CITT seems not satisfied with that, and they're looking for the actual documentation. Apparently, the manager or whoever was working with them could not provide it. I wonder how far they dug and where they looked for it, whether they asked prior administration for assistance in finding the documentation. I know nobody asked me for things in particular about it, although I was at the time asking constantly about the status of the audit. Looking through the website, resolutions, and the actual audit reports over the weekend, Chuck and I were able to dig up timeframes and the vendors that actually were involved in those capital improvement projects that the CITT money was used for. And there were resolutions for the road projects that were done by Magna Construction, by Craig Smith Associates, by Kimberly Horn. There was a traffic study, and AA Drainage worked on some storm drains, all of which employed monies from the CITT fund. If the
Please
village is
conclude your
not
thought.
able,
Thank you.
this is important.
I
If
understand.
the village is
Please
not able
conclude
to
your
come
thought.
up with that documentation, I suggest that the manager pursue the documentation with those vendors, and maybe they can help explain the $240,000 to the
Thank you.
satisfaction of the CITT auditors.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, next person.
Mac Kennedy. Mac Kennedy.
Mine's really quick about the budget. The 2020 budget includes raises for several staff members. Now, while I would not oppose giving people raises when they're deserved, I do have a couple of things I want to discuss about that. Raises in the budget include the village manager and the code officer, both of whom are here this evening. So it's a little awkward to discuss someone's compensation in front of them, and I recognize that, so I'll be sensitive to that. However, I'd like to hear from each of the commissioners the measures that you use to determine if these two people earned those raises and the amounts that you're proposing. Raises are given when employees exceed expectations, not just because. I would like to hear exactly how those two employees, in your individual opinions, exceeded expectations and what those expectations were. You had to have measured something to determine that they deserve a raise. Please explain and defend your vote to spend our taxes on employees that some residents believe are deficient or even negligent in their duties, and who I believe should be replaced. In the case of the code officer, you're rewarding her for not only poor performance, but also bad behavior regarding a recent code compliance meeting during which she attacked residents before storming out of the meeting. Each of you, please provide the measures this evening. Quantify your opinions. You're talking about a budget. A budget is numbers, and everything should be quantified. So I'm asking you to quantify those raises this evening. Do that in a concise way before you summarily hand out raises to people for no good reason. I owe Tracy an apology, so I'm going to direct this right at you. And I want to do it on public record. During the near-miss hurricane, which was catastrophic for our neighbors in the Bahamas and could easily have been the same for us, I express my displeasure with the fact that this village has no effective communications plan. We all understand the why of such a plan, so I won't go into the details of what I think it should look like. However, in a moment of frustration on social media, when neighbors were asking for information or sharing bad information, I told residents to go to the source for accurate information, the village manager, and elected officials. I had listed their village cell phone numbers that we pay for, and because I also had your personal number, Tracy, which you had given to me and told me to use, I listed that online as well. I immediately deleted it. I shouldn't have done that, and I apologize.
Thank you.
I deleted your number from my phone as well, so you don't have to worry about me calling you on your personal cell phone, but I do have your official cell phone number, which I'll continue to use for official village purposes. Thanks.
Thank you.
Barbara Q.
Barbara Kuehl, 111th Street. Like Rex, I also have problems with the contingency spread all over the budget. We always had a contingency fund that if there were things that we didn't think we could pay for, but maybe wanted to pursue during the year if things looked better, the commission could determine that money could come from that account. And the fact that, when I added it up quickly, I've spent like way too much time on Biscayne Park business. I came up with over $100,000. Rox came up with 100 and almost 30. But you're taking control. You're taking away control of over $100,000 from the commission and putting it in departments. Even though there are plenty of department heads that I have a lot of respect for and I trust, you're responsible for the village's money. It should not be floating around like that because you really don't know how that's going to be spent. And then it'll be, well, it was in the budget. So the budget manager, director, whatever his title is, it sounds like he was defending that last time. And at the first, I really have to say this, at the first workshop, he made a comment about raises, saying that we're notorious for underpaying our employees, and we really should give them more than 3%, maybe 5%, to keep employees from jumping ship. I've been here long enough to know that's not the reason employees have jumped ship. And I also felt it was inappropriate for the finance director to chastise the village for not paying enough money to our employees. And all of a sudden, everybody started getting 6%, 7%, and I'm with Mac on this. I'd like to know how these raises were determined. And the funny thing is, the one person, this might be my mistake, but I think the only person that works here that didn't get a raise, who I think really deserves a raise, is the chief of police. And somehow his salary seemed to remain the same. I don't know if any of you look at that, but you should take a look at who's getting a raise. The magistrate is billed at $6,000. I did some simple math and reading some of the cover letters. One of the people applying wanted $750, and they all want travel and travel time. So you figure the meeting would be about at $150 an hour. The meeting would be about 2 hours. Travel. The guy you picked is from Fort Lauderdale, so it's got to be an hour each way. And he also said he's going to charge for paperwork, so another hour. So you're up to $750 a meeting. Times 12 is $9,000, not $6,000. And I think we better start thinking about what this might cost, not what you'd like it to cost. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Clerk.
Janie Anderson.
Jamie Anderson with 19th Street. A couple little things. I see home-based business license fees were budgeted at $23.50 this year, but only $1,000 taken in. Are we saying there's actually less home-based businesses? Because that's a little hard to believe. Okay, we see that the new perk for the commissioners, the cell phones, is costing $3,000. Well, aside from we could have planted some trees for that or fixed a pothole or two, but okay, we'll move on. There's $4,200 budgeted this year and next under education and training for the commission, but nothing's been spent. How about reducing that by $3,000 as a goodwill gesture to cover those cell phones? And like others have said, at the first budget workshop, the finance person spent a great deal of time kind of getting into policy about raises and chastising us that 3% doesn't incentivize anyone, that makes us non-competitive. Well, he of all people should realize we will never be able to be competitive on salary with other cities. We have a small, non-diverse revenue stream, and even with the highest millage rate in the county, we can't take care of everything we need. So when I see one person geared to get a 6.68% raise, or $3,386, and another one a $3,048 or 7.43% raise, that's a problem. Because unless there have been evaluations, unless there have been performance standards, and you can prove that that person has met or exceeded, in what planet do we give raises just for giving raises? You know, I really hope my math is There's the $25,000 contingency under professional services. Well, another thing the finance manager tried explaining was that really contingencies were so important. There could be day-to-day emergencies, and yes, they really are transparent. Okay, Public Works can have an emergency. What emergency is going to be under professional services? It just sort of seems like a way to cover when those legal fees go back up. Under the manager, there's an auto allowance for $4,800, but also a $6,000 potential lease. Which is it?
Under other uses, 99.000, a $21,421 contingency. For what? The chief, no salary increase? Are we seriously kidding? The bright spot in this community, the guy who has affected so much change, and there's no salary increase? No, even code has a contingency, a total of $3,450. What emergency are they going to have? And of course, the $30,000 contingency under recreation. I mean, does that mean one morning we wake up to Splash Mountain? That's not transparent, folks.
Thank you. Madam Clerk?
Don't have anybody on the list.
Okay. Please remain seated, and we'll call you one at a time. Go ahead, sir.
Sure.
Ross, 11166 Griffin Boulevard. I have a technical question of the finance director, and we had this issue last year. The taxable value, according to the rollback sheet, comes in at $231,201,000. The budget you're using starts off with the 228 number, which is less than new construction. Okay, we had a letter last year, and I believe that technically you should be using the 231.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to be rude. Could you just
Sorry.
continue just the commission and Mr. Winklejohn, you can
Well, let me finish my question then.
Please, go ahead. I'll give you a few more
So-
seconds.
I'm sorry?
You can have a few more seconds afterwards since I interrupted you.
Oh.
Go ahead.
You can finish my question.
Actually,
Thank you.
I can
I'm done.
address it later.
You can address it
Pause,
later?
Mayor?
Okay. So what we have is, we have a letter from the Department of Revenue last year that says that the taxing authority requires in calculating the millage to use not less than 95% of the taxable value, and they identify it as line 4 on the rollback sheet, which is the 231 million. So I think what it means is that there's more revenue that would be coming into the village, is what it means, than the budget projects. That's the bottom line. My concern is that if we're not reflecting the correct number, does that make us out of compliance? I don't know, but our finance director is going to address whether my concerns are valid or not. And the only other thing, I would also voice my concerns about the fact that the contingencies in the different departments is not the way to go. You should have it in one spot, in one area, so that the commission can approve removing money from the contingency to the departments, so you have control, not the manager, because the manager can't move stuff from department to department, as I recall. Only the commission can do that. So by doing it the way you're doing it, you're giving the manager more control of the budget. I understand maybe you should do some sort of minor variant, like a administrative, we'll call it, contingency that's a minor amount of money, so you don't have to rush to the commission for $5,000 or something like that. But significant amounts, I don't agree with. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there somebody else who would like to speak? Mr. Raymond, please go ahead.
Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners, staff, neighbors. Hi. So congratulations on getting the budget in and to have it online in time for our people to review it. And I think overall the budget looks pretty good. There are some concerns that were raised tonight that I would share. Chief, I did see that in your salary. I don't know if you're at the cap or you don't want another raise, but thank you for your work that you do here. And thank you for a police budget that's actually lower than last year's, which is somewhat remarkable. I don't quite understand why or how, but thank you for that. And I guess I had a couple of comments just on some of the line items. I know there's a connector route for the CIT funds, and I'm not quite sure what that's connecting or where it's connecting. I was at the first budget workshop. I was out of town for the second one, so I don't know exactly what that is, but I'd be curious to hear exactly what that's going to be. The other thing, I just wanted to thank you. I know we've been talking about the drainage on 9th Avenue being replaced. It's the drain that's there. Christian's been hearing about since we've moved in, but there are well drains there which aren't even legal anymore. They're just got into the groundwater and they don't work. So thank you for that. And the only other thing on the drains that I wasn't sure that I saw on there, and I know that Commissioner Johnson Sardella brought this up at the first budget workshop, was having some money for cleaning the drains, all of the drains. I don't know if that's in there, and I just didn't see it. But anyway, so thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Any further public comments? Mr. Jonas.
Fred Jonas, 918 119th Street. This is what I meant. You have already made mistake number 1, which is you've limited yourselves to 9.7. Having done that, you give us a budget in which you're basically dumping money all over the place. You have no control of the money. You don't know where it is. You give excessive raises. You unload a tremendous amount of money on the village attorney. And the problem for the village, apart from the fact that you're just wasting a lot of money, is it takes money away from where we could really otherwise use it. So we can't do much about drainage. We can't do much about planting. We can't do much about median development. Because you've limited the amount of money the village can collect, and you've then just dumped it. That's the problem.
Thank you. Are there any further public comments? Okay, no further public comments. We're going to go ahead and I'd like my commission's opinion on this. We have comments. Do we want to answer them when we have Attorney Rodriguez, the proper way for a public hearing? I just want to make sure if there's anything that needs to be addressed here that the management wants to address, I'd like to give them that opportunity.
I think that's proper. I mean,
Okay. So before we get into commission discussion, then I would appreciate, there was a couple questions asked. One of them was regarding the millage, so that is an important piece, so I'd appreciate the finance director go ahead and answering that.
Which one? I couldn't hear you.
It was the one from Mr. Ross.
Mr. Ross, the backing up to last year, the introduction to your budget takes a conservative revenue number that comes out in middle of June and then is certified again in July, and then there's actually a final adjustment to it, which we get when the Department of Revenue form 420 actually gets populated by the numbers. They're not always the same. Regardless of that, last year what we did was we took the ad valorem, the total value less the ad valorem, with our charge of ad valorem, and we took 95% of that. That is an appropriate and allowed, and even, I think that letter mentions that you can take 95% of it. But the error that was made last year was we took it after the deduction of intangible property, so it lowered it a little bit. So we were off about $11,000 in the actual total line item. Your budget process, that's the right way to do the budget process in terms of real expected revenue. Although we do get that revenue, it just isn't as predictable. And so a conservative budget is to take the adjusted amount, 95% of that. Now, when we do today's resolution, an attorney can correct me, when we're putting in a millage rate, that doesn't amount to any of those numbers aren't part of that adoption. When we adopt a budget and we publish for our second hearing, at that time the budget will be the full amount of money potentially raised. There'll be that on the top line. The second line will be adjusted for etc., and then there'll be a reserve contingency should that money be realized. And what that does is it takes out less variance from your line items. That's what we did last year is we didn't put the top number in there. We started with the adjusted number. We'll do it right, obviously, this year. And if that's what you're asking about, I can, and if you want to incorporate these numbers into your documents today, I have them and we can add them in and make an adjustment today, if that would help. It's just the way I've been approaching it is to not show numbers that we're not spending or potentially spending. So if you'd like, if that's all right, Rebecca, you want to do that, I can read into the record the total amount generated by the ad valorem and then the adjusted amount.
now that the tentative
I'm
millage.
sorry, I'm going to ask you with the mic.
Now that the tentative millage has passed for first read, it's up to the commission.
And this is the budget resolution. When we publish the actual budget of the revenue, this is the little nuance, and it's important, but it is a small nuance in terms of budgeting, but it is required. So I would like to have this resolution incorporate, because he mentions the total value, and they don't want the total value, they want the total amount of revenue that value would generate with the proposed millage rate. So I can tell you that number is 2.2466 I can read that again. What we have in our budget is 2.104, which is about a $112,000 difference. And if you're looking in your proposed budget, you will see that's the same contingency from last year. It was $113,000 last year. It was $112,000 this year. That's your reserve generator, if you will, and cushion for the year. And it's unbudgeted and it's undirected, which to the comments earlier, it takes it completely out of the department's hands, and it requires an ordinance to move that money and to use it. And so it's sort of, I think we're all agreeing on that philosophical concept. Well, this structure does that with that money. The rest of the money, it's up to the commission how you'd like to adjust it. So then the effect of that is if you're on for section 1 of the budget, at the top of the revenues, currently I'll read it again, it's proposed that your revenue would be $2,104,546. The actual, the number that would start with is $2,242,655. Now 95% of that is where we start this conversation as a budgeting body by my recommendation, and that's $2,130,522.
I'm sorry, that was a little fast. One more time.
I'm sorry. It's $2,130,522. And that is exactly $112,000 and $112,133 extra money. That is exactly like the year before. It's about $1,000 difference. And what that does is that goes straight to your reserves. And we'll show that in the budget. We'll show all these numbers, and we'll show that there is a contribution of that amount of money to the reserves. That's how it's done. Does that make sense? So it's basically a couple of contingency item, that's a bad word. It's a budgeting calculation that you don't live off of. It's just required that they be announced that, hey, this much ad valorem, this much value creates this much value. Now go make a budget, and that's what we've been doing is the budget part, not the above the line part.
Thank you.
Chuck, did I? Okay, thanks.
There was also some other questions regarding the handling of contingencies. Would you care to address that?
There's a couple comments, and and I appreciate the opinions. My comments about personnel and fees was related to what was different between year A and year B. Year A being last year, my first year doing your budget, and year B this year. The difference was you have department heads in each of your major departments for the first time, and I said I would put my personnel hat on and say, when you have that, you have a financial stability that you haven't had, having recreated 2 or 3 of your audits. 80% of the problems in those audits were staff changes, and that was my comment. As a finance director, I'm saying that you have a massive inefficiency in your past, and that is a value to fix that. And it's sort of, the board, the commission, and the residents and the manager can characterize that any way they want, but with the blinders as a finance director on, you lose money when you change staff. That is an axiom of personnel. It costs money to change people often. And the other characterization I made, which I'll repeat, is with our limited revenue streams and very lack of variance in our revenue, very modest fluctuations from year to year, it's very hard for you to meet market, and you are not paying any of your senior staff at market. You're generating an opportunity for people who have already retired, which I believe I'm accurate. Dave and the chief are examples of people who have retired, including myself, by the way, and come back to work for other governments, and we can take no less health insurance, we willing to live on less salary, but okay, so you're below market, but if you're too far below market, somebody will take them from you. So one of your sister cities that are in this similar economic fold, and that's just a philosophical statement of personnel that is not disputable. It's what you decide, how you decide to digest it as the Village of Biscayne Park. And I left it in those terms, and I hope I clarified it better. It's y'all's decision how you spend your money. I'm just trying to give you the academic and the professional advice I can.
I have one last question, if I may, just because I want to make sure that was addressed. There was several residents who stood up and discussed the issues with contingency. Do you have any recommendations on a way to address that?
I do. There were 2 large, call them debates in your financial presentation, and they relate to not. The first one was more repair, maintenance, and building expenses and operating supplies. Those 3 terms are in a couple of your departments. I pointed them out through the workshops. Public Works has one, and Police has one, and I think Building has one. So those 3 departments each have a line item which catches almost $100,000 or more dollars, and then you do I complimented the detail because you actually spend it out, that huge line item, with a lot of detail. Some of it was fixed, some of it was somewhat discretionary type repair. I recommended in here is I split one of them because it was just too glaringly contrasting expense lines, and it's bad management to have them like that, because you lose track of reality when one's moving up and down and the other one's a recurring cost. You don't want them together. It's hard to, because your history will look funny. You look back at it and you'll make a mistake, which we almost did, and I believe Rox mentioned that last year, was that, oh, you got to watch that building line because like 20 or 30,000 of it are fixed costs, and she was spot on that remark, and that's kind of where I was headed. Now, that part is the first glaring, maybe we want to look at this topic. Inside those lines, there were, from prior year, you didn't want to reduce those lines, but the staff didn't recommend an exact expenditure for year 2 for the more discretionary type items. And when I say discretionary, they're not a fixed thing we got to buy every year. It's like, maybe we'll do this project instead of this, or buy a lift instead of a truck. So the prices aren't always the same. So what happens is a couple $1,000s falls out of, I don't need that for anything I know of, but let's just title it contingency and keep my line item equal, rather than grow the line item, which is traditionally a bureaucratic style and habit. They kept them the same, but they just didn't know what they wanted to use that $1,500 or $2,000 or $3,000, and they wanted to know that if something happens, correct me, Christian, or the managers, if I'm not articulating this perfectly, I wanted to keep that money in my line item, speaking on there as they're saying it, and if I have to shift a little bit, if I decide, and this happened this year, if I decide not to buy that kind of lift, I want to buy this kind of lift, can I use that money creatively to solve the problem of the day? And that's the logic in those line items, right? It's not a contingency, meaning I'm going to bundle them all together and buy something that's never been discussed. The last piece of that I've personally recognized is that when the chief or the public works director came to you with a program change, they used that kind of money, or they shifted what was proposed in the 2019 budget. They said, hey, I was going to buy this kind of lift, I want to buy this kind of lift. Or I was going to buy 6 of these, instead I want to buy 4 and 3. They presented that to you with a resolution and an adoption, so you had the control over it. So my comments were, at the second workshop, said, hey, they're asking for this money to stay, and they're going to make a professional decision as the year plays out how to use it, and they're going to ask again to use it. That's how I recall it happening most times. There are, this just happened, we have to spend, we got to fix it. So the both can be true at the same time, and both are valuable, I think.
Thank you. I'm trying to see if there's any other questions. Really needed. No, I think you addressed them all. Thank you very much.
Do you want me to talk about the CITT audit?
Oh, yes, please.
Yeah, my accountant wasn't available. She's in a meeting just like this up in Tampa right now, so I didn't get her exact answer, but I was able to go back through the emails, and I found the audit report, and I may not agree with the wording, and we don't have to debate it, but the way I read the memo and the way our accountant responded in her draft to the manager was, we calculated $206,949 of claims. You only are showing in your audits a total of $112,299, and that's about an $80,000 difference. We needed to show them that $80,000. Now they're talking a year 14 and 15 and 16. So we've finally got those audits. And I think, and you said you went through it, I don't know, I got to go through it too and figure out what they meant by that for sure, because she told me we know where it is in the audit. It was just some transfers that we didn't agree on with them, but the auditor came up with them. So there's room for discussion still on those two numbers. But I believe the magnitude is not over $200,000. It's really a discussion of about $80,000 of what they think we've claimed
For 14,
versus
15,
what we
and
think
16?
we've claimed. And we think we've claimed a lower number.
Okay, that's for 14, 15?
Yeah, it's prior year. They stopped at, I think, 16?
Okay.
Yeah,
So-
the audit was 2008 to 2016.
Yeah, so year 17 and 18, we have really good accounting now. And those years, I'm not worried about at all. That's good. The prior years, I don't have my finger on exactly. I've heard her comments. What I kind of has suspected is that we could probably derive it and dig up those numbers and argue back and forth. And Dave can tell me what they mean when they say that you've claimed more than we can show, or however they word it. But it's an open negotiation, is maybe not the right word. It's an unresolved conflict of one audit versus another, and I think it's premature to conclude. But I don't think it would affect us today effectively.
Thank you.
Mayor, I'd like to address that as well.
Go ahead.
That audit remains open. It's that we've not sent in the management response yet because we are still working on that. We plan to have Javier Betancourt, the director of CITT, here tonight to speak. He had to postpone till next month, but that will be forthcoming. But it's not a done deal yet. We're still searching for some of the old records from 2008, 2009, 2010. Ms. Ross mentioned that she happened to find some. I'd love to have a list of that, and we can go through and search that. She and I discussed this last night, so I'm aware of her findings. So we'll continue to work on it.
Thank you, and thank you for volunteering those records if you have them.
Yeah, and can I, if you accept my apology, and the attorney's going to love this, I just remembered how your ordinances are actually created, and that's why Chuck's number doesn't show up exactly the way that, and it causes this problem. What you see isn't going to be the ad. In the adoption, the ordinance, it asks for the total value. It doesn't ask for the value generated, and that's why. And it's just a characteristic of our ordinance. Rather than list everything, we list one and the other over here. We list $231 million of assessable value or property value, and then the 9.7 is the millage, and that's what's required, I believe. Those three numbers: the percentage, the new the rollback rate, the new millage, and the total value on Form DR 420, which is exactly the and I double checked it this year, the 231 million assessed value. So that's why it doesn't need to be in here. But the budget I will put in the newspaper with your clerk will have all those numbers because it's required there.
Okay, thank you very much. We have Senator Piso here, so I'm going to try and move this along a little bit just to make sure we can get through this. I'm going to open up the floor to both the manager. If you have any further comments, the attorney, any further comments?
The only comment I have is regarding contingencies for departments, contingency line items. There is a cost to the village if the manager has to come to the commission for an ordinance on amending the appropriations. We actually just went through that with respect to the legal fees line item because there wasn't a cushion in the professional services budget. So it's a policy decision as to what that number should be, but there is a cost to having the manager come back to the commission to amend the budget formally via ordinance because there isn't a sufficient cushion in a department budget for the manager to make intra-departmental changes, which the charter allows him to do. So I would just keep that in mind when you review the contingency line items for each department. The amount is a policy decision, but there is a benefit to having some cushion because your charter requires an ordinance for budget amendments, and it also requires the manager to bring any anticipated shortfalls to the commission's attention without delay, is the language in your charter. So please keep that in mind when you're reviewing the contingency line items in the budget.
And if I could tag that, just one more comment. That's what we talked about at Workshop 2, was sort of a philosophical debate. There was an idea, let's put all the contingencies in one area and then they have to be managed that way, and that was the exact reason, was because you'd need an ordinance to move them back to the departments that actually need them, and you would lose control, and you would have huge delays and significant delays in cost. Whereas now they're better in your favor because they are lined up along the departments in a particular area. So it's a debate. If you spread it out, it's not a lot of money in each department.
May I ask just
Yes,
a
ma'am.
technical question, and then I'm going to open it to other commissioners, but isn't there a way so that the concern is that and I understand their point, is that if you had a spendthrifty manager, which we don't have, who decides he wants to go out and blow something beautiful on this nice $30,000 thing on the rec center, then he didn't come before us. Well, the truth is we do have procurement laws that prevent that over $10,000. But because it's contingency, I'm just wondering if we couldn't have some sort of tag on that to maybe make, and I'm not going to pick the dollar amount, it could be 5,000, I'll let the commissioners talk about that as we're going to go person to person just to make sure we can get through it. But I think that maybe alleviate some of the fears that it's just going to be spent. What I don't want to do is force an ordinance and the cost of that on top of it. So maybe some sort of resolution that at least let us know when we all concur. So that way we're not having that issue. That's just my thought on that. If we can do it, can we do it without an ordinance so that there's a cap and we can do a reso, or is there some way to cut down the fee on that if we put like a cap for him to come before us? I don't want him to I don't want him to have to come before us on every little thing, but maybe 5,000 or.
Well, the amount is a commission decision, right? But once it's within the department, your current charter authorizes the village manager to make intra-departmental changes as needed. That's what your current charter says. So the question for the commission is, what number would the commission be comfortable with, knowing that the village manager has that charter authority?
Regardless, thank you.
Right.
I'm going to open the floor. If you don't mind, I'm going to go from this end all the way to that end.
Can I give a real example real quick? One of the things that happens, as an example, is should somebody wonderful like Caesar leave, how would you replace him within that department? You would have to juggle other, and this is a terrible example, I'm sorry, but the point is if the manager can't reorganize the department with who the potential replacements are versus the past, you're always handcuffed. And so that's one of the major values of that flexible policy, is that if somebody leaves and he's able to replace them, you would replace them with a different skill set on some percentage, and so you might have to do something different with the department, as an example. And it could be one of his foremen, or the police chief doesn't let anybody leave, so that's not, just seeing if he's listening. All right, got him.
You got him.
Yeah, but that's my point, is that there are more things than just buying a hammer versus nails. It could be a personnel shift.
Okay, thank you. We have Senator Piso here, and I don't normally do this, but I want to check with the attorney. Is there any way possible to allow Senator Piso to interrupt our public hearing and pause it? Is that done? Sorry.
Technically, you should wrap up this meeting. The other meeting hasn't started yet, and I want to do a phone meeting to Senator Pizzo, but I don't know how
I
much
apologize. Thank you so much for your patience. Okay. I tried. Okay. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and open comments to commissioners. I'll start with Commissioner Johnson-Sardella.
I'm going to start just right with the contingency line item, since that's what seems to be has been discussed the most.
He's talking to your mic.
Between us and the residents. I agree as well. I don't like the large numbers that are in each of the department contingencies, and I understand the reason why the department heads would want that flexibility. I'm just not comfortable, like, for example, the $25,000 contingency line item under professional services, the $30,000 in parks and recs. I think as a commission, we should figure out what a comfortable number is for those, if it is a rainy day or something, an emergency happens, so that our department heads are able, some wiggle room, but such a large number, I am uncomfortable with. That we're not always going to have the same people, not always the same staff, not always the same managers, and I don't want to set a precedent that this is how this functions, because you just never know. We can't plan for who it won't be the same commissioners, who we'll be dealing with in the future, and I think we need to be a little more conservative, because we do deal with such a tight budget.
Are there other issues?
I don't think we discussed the comments on the raises, but if it's my understanding, I don't know if, accepting that in the budget, we've actually issued raises yet. I don't know if that's
Well, there's both. There's bonuses and raises both, depending on what department.
Okay. Let's see. I think that was my main issue right now. I don't know if we want to all address the contingency item before we move on to the next one.
I'd like to actually go one and go through it all, since we're trying to time sensitive here. Anything else you wanted?
That's it for right now.
Okay.
If there's something else.
Commissioner Wise.
Yes, and just in response to Commissioner Sardella's addressing the contingency issue, I feel differently. I'm comfortable that there are enough different eyes, departmental, managerial, things that will come before the commission, that we will be able to keep tabs on how this money is spent. I don't think that there's a history, as you said, of spendthrift behavior. And This will be the first year that we try it. We'll see how it goes, but we have very good accounting eyes on everything that we're doing, and I feel comfortable, particularly with the department heads that we have in place, to give them the autonomy to make decisions that are in the best interests of the village.
Are there any other comments that you have on the budget? No? Vice Mayor?
Well, I have a lot of comments on the budget. When we go over it.
And we're going over everything now, so now your comments.
Well, I got a whole bunch. So I thought we were going. This is the first reading. I thought we're supposed to be going over.
This is the first reading after 2 workshops, so you may go through your comments.
You go ahead next, because I got a lot. So.
No, we're going to go one at a time. Please go ahead, sir. You're next.
Okay, well, first off with the contingent, how long we've been doing this with this fund? I mean, I have a problem if the city manager, and again, this is not questioning the department heads, but if the city manager has to come back in front of the commission when he spends a certain amount of money, I think that the department heads or the department should be doing the same thing. You said cost. I'm confused about what do you mean by cost? How much is it going to cost? Attorney, yes, ma'am. You made a comment about the cost.
Yes, so your charter requires the manager to come before the commission without delay if it appears that there will be a shortfall in the current appropriations in the budget. So let's say in the middle of the fiscal year, the village manager sees that there's an anticipated shortfall. We're not going to make it to the end of the year with the budget for this department, for example. The manager is obligated under your charter to bring that before the commission timely. And then the commission has to vote to either amend the budget by increasing the appropriation for that item or alternatively reducing the expenditure for that item to balance. So that requires an ordinance. Any budget amendments require an ordinance, and as you know, ordinances have to go through 2 reads, be advertised, etc. So there's an expense, there's a legal cost to that because it's ordinances. There's an advertising cost to that because it has to be advertised beforehand. So when I referred to cost, that's what I was referring to. Potentially minor changes in a department budget requiring an ordinance could become costly if there's not sufficient cushion in the budget.
Before we did this, didn't we have all the money into into the general fund? And did
You mean one contingency, sir?
Yeah.
Well, I think you're trying to say one contingency
One
fund.
contingency fund, right? We always had that. What was the cost then? I mean, I don't understand what
But
you're
it depends
talking
on whether
about.
or not we touched it. You know, if it was just left there in a fund and we didn't touch it, then no, there was no cost. But if we would have had to reach into that, then we would have had to have write the ordinances and all of that.
So would there be emergencies that you can't come back if you need to come to the commission at the next commission meeting and ask for money? There would be no cost.
Well, the way we have it currently under the contingencies like that, we could do it that way with no cost. But if it goes into one contingency fund and say, the contingency fund is sitting in the admin account and it's the police department that needs the additional funds, I would have to come back to the commission. We'd have to do the 2 ordinances, the 2 readings. That doesn't allow us to move fast if it's an emergency. That slows it down because we have to have 2 commission meetings, and there's the expense of the ordinances, the legal fees, and so forth.
One additional, with respect to, I think there's 2 separate issues. With respect to emergencies, your charter does provide for emergency procedures for emergency appropriations, should you have a hurricane, a tornado, something like that. But separately, there's just everyday things that happen throughout the course of a fiscal year that may change a projected budget in an unforeseeable way. And in those non-emergency situations, the manager is obligated to bring that to the commission without delay. And the commission then has to make a decision as to how they are going to amend the budget to deal with that potential shortfall. There's an ordinance cost, preparation cost with that with respect to legal, and there's an advertising cost for that with respect to the second read of that ordinance.
May I ask my colleagues a question to maybe help Vice Mayor's concerns as well as some of the residents' concerns and as well as Commissioner Johnson Sardella? Is there a possibility that we could just have something in here that puts a financial cap where it has to, he's not going to have an ordinance to do it, but at least he has to come in front of the commission to seek approval, so that there's like a $5,000, because normally it's a $10,000. Right now, if he had to spend over $10,000, he'd still, even it's in contingency, would have to come in front of us anyway, correct?
Absolutely.
If it wasn't for professional services, yes.
Okay, so So can we have something for professional services that states that if they go over a certain amount, they have to come before the commission? So can we have something as a, what I'm trying to do is not spend all night on what is a concern for many, but at the same time allows for enough flexibility to be real-time functional as a municipality.
It's a quandary because what you're proposing cuts against the manager's inherent authority under the charter as it's currently in place.
Drafted.
Love this charter.
Okay,
Well,
continue, I'm sorry, go ahead.
A couple of them, I agree with Commissioner Jenny Johnson-Saldana. The rec center and the professional service, that's $25,000 there and $30,000 there. It can be used for anything that you decide to use it on, correct?
Well,
If you decide to use the $25,000 to help with the attorney fees, you can do that, correct?
under professional services?
Yes.
That would be a possibility. It wouldn't be that I would just decide to do that. I would come to the commission and let you guys know if something was going to be, if we were going to need to touch those.
And then,
You know?
and then the rec center one, you have $30,000. That was supposed to be for the sod and all of the replacing of the lawn, correct?
Right, but we're
So-
still in hurricane season, and we may, if we get a hurricane, the rec center field is our staging area. We need that contingency there for correction if that field, is in fact used for hurricane debris.
Well, one of my concerns is, and I expressed it to you about in reference to the splash pad, that this was never brought in front of the commission to have a discussion to improve. And
There's not a splash pad
Well-
yet.
Okay, there's been a lot of questions on that, so I may I ask a question to clarify that once and for all? If he has $30,000 and it's over $10,000 for that particular budget item, he has to come before the commission, correct?
Absolutely.
Thank you. That's all I want to. Go ahead. Sorry.
okay, so you really want me to go over all of these, right? Because I have a whole bunch. Because otherwise, I can't vote for this budget if I'm not allowed to go over these.
Sir, why don't you pick your key ones and go over those?
There's too many of them.
Did you meet with the manager to go over them beforehand?
Madam, I had these changes that were supposed to have been done at the last workshop, and I'm still seeing that it has not been done. So I have a lot. So if I can't go over department by department, which is I thought what we were doing tonight was going department to department, especially in the first reading. This is more, at least I believe this is more important than the workshops. Am I correct? Because it becomes a first reading, and then a second reading becomes final as our budget.
I don't know how I would answer that question.
Vice Mayor, the way it typically works is that we do all the back and forth and making our changes and negotiations in the workshops, so that when we get to the budget hearings, we can, just sort of, we do the legal aspect of it.
Now,
vote it in.
changes that I requested in the other one there's plenty of them that has not
Okay,
changed.
which changes, please?
There's too many. I'd rather go over, but we're supposed to go over this one by one. That's the whole purpose of why we're doing this, is to go over each department.
That was the budget workshops, but we can do that.
Now, okay,
So-
if the commission doesn't want to do it, then I can't support this budget at all.
Just go through your items.
There's too many. There's too many. I got too many of them that I'm concerned about here. I mean, that's the purpose of me doing my job here, is not to just rush through all these things.
Would
We
you-
did this at the last commission meeting, and we're doing it again at the last workshop. We're rushing. I want us to take our time in doing this. That's what I thought we're supposed to be doing. I took time, 4 hours today, and I'm that much of reading this stuff. I'm the first one to admit it. I took 4 hours to go over every single page here.
I did
And I
as
even
well.
got advice from other residents who know more than I do. And to stand here and tell me that I have to pick what I want to pick out and we're not going to discuss it, I have a problem with it. But again, the majority of the commission speaks. So if the majority says that we want to just go on, then we'll go on. But I can't vote for this.
Commissioner Susan.
I understand there may be quite a few items, and you're worried about, the time that it's going to take, but I'm of the mindset that we all have different ways that we tackle an issue. We all have different ways that we want to represent the residents. If Vice Mayor Samaria wants to go through his individual items, I personally don't have an issue with that, but I do understand that we can't. I would, in a perfect world, I'd like to be able to pause the meeting so that we could
Right.
have the senator come up. So I don't know if there's any way possible, because this is going to be, I think this is going to be a little bit more of a discussion than what it may have been in the past.
I mean, it could be we could pause the meeting. We could take a recess so Senator Pizzo could kind of informally, since he's on an agenda for a meeting that hasn't started yet, make his presentation so he's not our hostage.
Okay, if there-
That's an alternative, and then we could, when you do agenda approval for the meeting, you just remove him from the, remove that item from the agenda because.
Okay. If there's no objection from the commission, I think we should do that. Senator Piso has been kind enough to come to us. Can we recess this meeting? Hold on.
Madam Mayor, if I may, I have to go to the women's event close by and come right back.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, yes, that would make perfect sense. We'll make it work. Whenever you're here, we'll make it work. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. My apologies. Okay, Vice Mayor Samari, go through your items, please.
Okay, in the revenue, it says I think that's $1,991,000.
Just tell us the page you're on, please, if you don't mind.
Page 2.
Thank you.
And a lot of this is probably, it can go fast because it's just a couple questions that I'm asking.
No problem.
Is this the correct amount?
So the 95% levy, is that the question?
Yes, yeah, the 95% levy, is that the correct amount?
That is the correct amount as the budget is constructed. Will there be a reserve built in on top of this, just like last year? Yes, and I gave those numbers. I can give them again if you want.
Okay, page 3.
It's about a $30,000 difference.
That's what I figured, 30,000.
Yeah.
So, but shouldn't that show that?
No, not when the funds are tied to intangible property, which is it can change. And so we leave that one off, and we don't bank our budget on money that I don't recommend you budget from. We put it in there to meet the statutes, but we're not budgeting from it. So if you do realize it, which you have in the past, it flows to your bottom line, which means it's a reserve fund.
Page 3. Is that projected, or the adopted? Is that the projected on page 3?
Utility
the
tax.
Total amount, the 195.
I'm just going to tell for the public, so you're not bored. He's discussing utility tax, electric, water, and gas.
I'm sorry.
On
I
revenue.
should have said that.
Right. That is the projected amount. That's best estimate.
Okay, on page 16, I think you explained it, but I need more detail.
Which
Okay,
department?
I'm sorry.
Revenues? We start-
Revenues.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
thank you.
No problem.
Page
Go ahead.
16 of revenues. It says miscellaneous revenue. Maybe you did explain at the last meeting. What is the 5,000 miscellaneous expenses?
It is
miscellaneous
I'll call that a placeholder. What happens is somebody gives you money that doesn't fit a area, you have to have a line item to book it from an accounting standpoint. Historically, you've had them, sold something, I don't know, I can't even remember what they are.
That may be something that we've surplused and
Yeah,
gotten a
it
few
could be
dollars for.
a donation.
So is there a
guessing.
problem of labeling it? I mean, putting it in here and tell it exactly what it is? Because when I look at something miscellaneous revenue, I get concerns.
Right. It's a placeholder so that as the financials are delivered to you, and we do get some funds there, it'll show. If we don't get the funds, it'll show as missing. And so your budget will show you like a track record every month how it went. If something unusual happened, this is where you would look at it from a revenue standpoint. Every other revenue has a real specific line item that's a fund often, and so this is, you got to have it because when you do get the revenue, where are you going to put it? You can't mislabel it,
Yeah,
so
but
that's what this fits.
I'm still confused because it still doesn't tell me what the miscellaneous revenue is.
Well, we don't know at this point.
We don't know. It's an unknown.
Okay, then how
It just holds a spot. 5,000 is historic. You had 12,000 one year. You had 3,000 the year before, so you round it and you
Okay,
assume.
so how did you come up with the 5,000?
Because it was 12,000 the year before, and it was about 3,000 the year before that. That's from my memory. It says it in the book that it was 12,000 last year.
Continue.
But it wasn't that high the year before, so it's a
Okay.
placeholder. It's not there to tell you something other than if something is realized, it'll show up there on your financials.
Okay, on the same department, on page 19 of 19, the sanitation fund, public works, that comes from that's in the general fund, right?
Okay. In the sanitation fund budget, all by itself, it anticipates certain amount of revenue coming into the general fund from the sanitation fund. That's what this is reflecting.
Next.
Does that make sense?
Okay.
And that there's a whole worksheet on that. It's a percentage by employees. It's a whole formulaic portion that's adopted when you adopt the sanitation budget. But the sanitation budget owes your general fund. It's like an IOU. This is how it shows up as revenue. You have to have a line item for that revenue.
Okay. Commission, page 5. This has to do with the cell phones. It says up on top, this includes the cost of cell phones for 5 commissioners. It's only 4.
Yes. And halfway through the year, if you change your mind, I got to have the money for it.
No, I won't be changing my mind, because I would have did it in the beginning.
We are
of the
going to
year.
disagree on this. I'm the budget guy. This is how I do it.
Okay.
I mean, if you really want a symbolic,
yeah,
I understand, but I can't do that.
At the beginning, when we were first talking about the cell phone, I paid a compliment to Commissioner Weiss because she said that she was going to put her salary towards, because everything was talking about the cost. What I was trying to save was cost. I didn't think we should spend that kind of money. Made the suggestion that she was going to donate her salary to paying for the phones. Has that changed?
Okay, this is a budget hearing, not specifically, and with all due respect, he told you he just answered the question and said that you had to have...
Moving on to the next one about the cell phones. Please, don't rush. Please, do not rush me.
I think I could, if I may, your charter has a specific requirement that anything regarding commissioner compensation requires a forfeits vote. So since there was no motion on the floor and the commission therefore has not passed a motion with a forfeits vote regarding Commissioner Weiss or any commissioner's salaries, that it was more of a statement than...
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to respectfully ask, as this process moves forward, that, I mean, I went through it as well. I called Mr. Winklejohn this morning for extra
Well, it was
questions.
every morning. No, I'm sorry.
That's not true. But I did call him this morning and went through all the questions that I had ahead of time. I also talked to the manager. If I had any questions with any department, I asked through the manager. So my request is to please move through this without focusing on the minutiae if possible. Thank you.
With all due respect, we're supposed to do this to the public. Speaking to Christian.
Go ahead.
Point of order. Please, Mayor, stop interrupting me when I'm talking and stop please trying to rush me to go through the process. If you want not to do this, then just say you don't want to do it, and then the commission can vote on it, on whether or not to accept the budget that it is. I am doing my homework on this. I do not understand the budget, so when I don't understand something and it's in front of me, I like to go over it. If the commission doesn't want to do that, that's okay. Just make a motion to accept the budget, and I'll vote on the way we have to do it.
Commissioner Weiss, you had a comment?
I move that we go ahead and approve the budget. We've had 2 workshops on these matters. If there were issues that were of concern to Commissioner Samaria, he had 2 opportunities in multiple hour-length meetings to bring them up. I also know that Mr. Winklejohn makes himself available at any time if we have any questions. Yeah. And Commissioner Samaria, you had an opportunity to resolve these things before tonight's meeting. So I think that unfortunately the window has closed for such elementary questions.
Make the motion.
The motion.
So is there a motion?
That we approve the budget.
Before we do that, in all fairness, if you don't mind, I know, but I'd like to give Commissioner Tudor at least an opportunity. If you want to make a motion, and I'll have the attorney correct me.
Sorry, I forgot Commissioner Tudor.
I'd like to have him have the opportunity to speak.
I'm easily forgotten.
I don't want him to be forgotten either. So if before we do that, out of respect for the Vice Mayor, is there anything substantive that you found amount-wise or any corrections that you find problematic that you'd like to address before we close this, since we're not going item by item?
All of these, I had discussions in the last workshops. My changes that I suggested has not been done. That's the whole purpose of why I went through this again and I looked at it. I take the budget very serious. And, the commission is a majority. I'm one of 5 commissioners. There's a motion. Second it. I just can't support this budget until
May
I have to have all of this discussed.
To be fair, I agree with my fellow Commissioner Wise that we had the 2 workshops to go through everything. But, Vice Mayor, you've not heard me sit here and try to silence you, but if there are items that really you have requested changes or we've discussed at workshops and you're not seeing that those changes have been made, please bring those up. please bring them up. I'm not sitting here trying to silence that. I think what we're trying to just do is get through this and not repeat things that probably should have happened during the workshop. But by all means, if there's things that you have raised previously and they haven't been changed, please bring those up.
Before this commission, I sat out there many times. We had 2 workshops, then we had a first reading, and each of the commission went through each of the items. Then you had a second reading. And I just don't understand why we're going away what we used to do. I understand we have guests here that's important, and I like to hear from the senator too, but I just, there's too much of this that I need to go over, that I need to understand. I can't vote for something that I do not understand. I'm sorry, I just can't do it.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Tudor.
Yes. The questions I have are really kind of real quick. Unfortunately, I was ill and unable to attend the second budget workshop, so I didn't have that second bite at the apple to kind of discuss some of these things. So just so that I have a better understanding of a couple of the increases that I saw in the current budget, and forgive me if this was discussed at the last budget workshop and resolved, but this is just for my clarification. The $6,000 increase for HR support.
That was for, we went to hire a company to rewrite the employee manual and update several things in our HR that ours are so outdated that we need a professional to come in and bring them up to date.
Okay.
So that was that.
And will they be, I know they're going to be looking at rewriting the HR policies. Are they going to be looking across the entire spectrum, including employee review processes and the like? 'Cause I know that was raised, and I know it's a touchy area with a lot of organizations, especially government organizations, how the raise process works and employee reviews. So that's one of the areas they're going to be looking at as well?
We will have them look at that.
Okay. And the increase at next level was jumped from 7,200 to 12,000.
That's an increase that Next Level has requested, and we are going to push back on that, try and get that reduced.
Okay.
So
we're just
that will be
budgeting
coming-
for it just as a worst case scenario.
Worst case scenario.
Okay. Also, I know some residents raised concerns about the raises for some of the employees that we have. I understand that since we historically have paid very low wages, that it's time that we start trying to correct some of that. But I think it's also important that when we designate a raise, we should have something that we clearly point to. I think it's just more along the lines of transparency, and just so that it creates a better narrative for the commission and for residents. Typically, I've seen things where raises are tied to CPI or cost of living adjustments, and those are factored in. I know that's one of the things they do at the agency I work at. Every year, it's pretty much across the board 3%. That kind of hits that. So I'd kind of like to see, I definitely like to see that addressed, because I think it's just important. It's definitely something you want to see from a professional organization, so that everybody understands where those numbers are coming from.
Across the board, we did do a 3% across the board. With some of our senior staff, we increased it a little bit more because we do want to maintain them. We do want to keep them. The chief was brought up, and the chief actually had received a raise this year. We brought him up considerably because he was not the highest paid person in his department after we brought him in at such a good rate. And so we bumped him up a little bit. So that's where his raise was. That's why he's not getting a raise this coming year. We certainly value the chief, and we want to keep him as well. If you guys insisted that I give the chief an additional 3% raise, I would delightedly do it. That said, there's also, you see larger raises in there for the commander and the captain, both of whom have been working at reduced salaries. The chief specifically requested those amounts for those two individuals, and because he wants to retain them as well and compensate them fairly for the job that they do.
May I have one question on that?
Yes.
With Commissioner Tudor's permission. There was a bonus section there for, I think it was, I don't know, it was $1,500 for bonuses, and I was wondering if we couldn't just roll that, or I didn't know why that was there. I was trying to understand. In the
Where?
police department, which is unusual with the contract, so I assumed it was for one of the 3 employees. There was a I think there was a $1,500.
In the police department?
Yep. Yes, sir.
I thought it was a minute.
Was it building or?
No,
police
I think it was
department?
administration, wasn't it, for John Paul?
All right, I'll hold off on that. Just continue. I'm sorry. I'll find it and then bring it back. Thank you.
And then the last question I had was just the increase, and I know this was probably discussed at the last budget workshop, but I noticed under administration, the finance contract, there's an 18% increase from 46,350 to 55.
For GMS?
Yeah.
Yes. They have been doing an exceptional job at a below market rate, and they have requested a raise as well for that.
Okay.
So, and they're still doing it. I mean, even with the raise, they're still below market. So.
Okay.
And I believe there was some question too about the raise for Jean-Paul in building. And again, it's another employee that we were fortunate to get. He's very knowledgeable, and he was brought in at a very low salary. I do want to keep him.
But that was from 31,457 to 32,879, so that's not a huge.
Yeah,
amount.
it isn't.
But I'm sorry, they were. I didn't misspeak. The merit bonus was for the $1,500 for special pay.
For where?
On the building department, page 3 of 8. That was the only question I had that I couldn't clear up. And I'm sorry I couldn't ask you earlier today. I got tied up.
Excuse me, Mr. Raymond? Could you assist the resident behind you? She dropped something right by your feet. Sorry.
And then,
Thank you.
And I guess the last issue that's been batted around back and forth is contingencies. And I understand having contingencies tied to individual departments, but I also, understand the other side of that argument where contingencies are maintained in one account, thereby giving a little bit better. Well, the argument is it gives a little bit better oversight. So, I see both sides of that argument. I understand, having contingencies in individual departments, but,
Can I make one?
I personally prefer to have it a little bit more closely monitored. I kind of like having it into one account. That's just my, my opinion.
I want to make one statement, though, and I think there was some comments made about who your personnel matters, and I think in this case we do have that personnel that this actually works for. This is for a year. It's not for 20 years. I think we've already went from 430,000 when I remember going over it with the first finance director we had B, and then we're at about 800 now, if I believe that's correct. By the end of the year, we'll be around roughly 800 in our reserves.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't think spending thrift when we maybe put about 100,000 a year into the reserves, where you managed to go quite significantly over the last couple of years. So I don't see somebody who's spending a lot, and I think they're asking us to do this, and I think we can. At least I feel comfortable asking the manager, will you make sure you are very clear on how these are spent, and it's not just the department head spending? Because the only thing I've noticed is that, and the only concern I have, and I've spoken to the chief about it, I know he was rebuilding the department from scratch and has done an outstanding job. The only concern I had was some of the vehicles and buying older vehicles and make sure we don't get into the vehicle business. And I think we've learned our lesson on that, at least I hope historically. I just want to make sure that kind of thing doesn't happen with contingency and things like that. So for me, it's not repeating the same mistakes that we've had, and also making sure that we've had oversight by the manager to make sure that not just the department head spending the money in their budget. So
No,
with the
it's-
contingency, and I think you've heard it from everybody here, that we are concerned about making sure contingency isn't just a slush fund.
Well, no, and absolutely, and I work closely with all the department heads, and so if there's going to be an expenditure like that, they come to me. If it's beyond my capacity to spend over the $10,000, then certainly I come to the commission. So.
And would you agree publicly to go over for the 25,000 professional service at least, even though that's not in there? Would you agree to come to the commission for us on that, even though there's no ordinance required?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I have no problem
Thank
there.
you.
So.
Any other
Madam
comments?
Mayor, yeah, I just had one comment. Well, I should say two comments. One was on one of our residents, Mr. Raymond mentioned, and I had mentioned about the drainage, the drain cleaning, and I was looking through here again as well myself, and I don't see a line item, so I just want to make sure I'm not missing something, or you can tell me kind of how that would work in.
Yes, Dave has that either in his road fund or it's in the road fund, I believe. Yeah.
Okay.
It's totally in there.
Okay.
Covered.
And we're sufficiently funded, right?
And I mean, my last comment really is I just wanted to reiterate the item on the contingencies, and it sounds like the rest of my commissioners are not agreeing with me. I like I said, I'd like to see in those two larger line items, the professional services and Parks and Rec, to see a lower number to strike a compromise if we're going to keep it with the departments. I agree with the idea that it's in the departments so that they can function, but I also don't want to give up oversight.
What number would you like to see there?
For professional services, I'd probably be more comfortable reducing that down to like 10,000. And Parks and Rec, I mean, I liked, our finance manager's explanation, like let's say, for example, in Public Works, that there was some sort of history, there's something historical there that makes me comfortable as to why that contingency number is what it is.
Right, that was from the sod management creativity that took place. So he doesn't think he has to have that money, so it sort of fell into let's hold it just in case I don't have the success we had last year.
May I ask a question, because I think he answered something and I just want to be clear. Manager, did you not specifically state because of hurricanes and the resodding issue in the field? Because if not, we'd
For the
have to
field,
put
yeah.
seed in it, correct? FEMA will only pay for seed.
Right.
So if we destroy the rec field, we will not be able to use it for however long it takes to reseed it unless we have some contingency to pay for that sod, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
And south of Lake Okeechobee, good luck trying to reseed.
Well, and not only that, though. I mean, if we had to use the field for a staging area, there's going to be a cleanup component to that as well. It's not just, we can't just, rake it and call it that. We have to make sure that, no glass, nothing else is mixed into that. So it's replacing some soil, it's replacing the sprinkler system as well as the sod. So it's not going to be an inexpensive prospect.
Okay, thank you.
That was my last comment. No disrespect obviously to our village attorney, but obviously we've had all these conversations about billing and amounts of money, and things like we have a budget of what we budget for our attorney. And if we have a contingency line item that's large, I just want to be able to have oversight and rein things in a bit. And I don't think reducing the number by something reasonable will prevent the manager to do what he needs to do if it's necessary. If there is some emergency and our legal fees have to tick up a little bit. But I don't like kind of the cookie jar just being such a big number. Because again, staff can change, people can change. And if we just start this habit, maybe overlook the next time at the next commission and it stays there. So I've said my piece, I think, and depends on how everyone else follows.
I think we've all said our piece. At this point, I guess there's a motion of any kind. Is there a motion?
Mayor, one quick
Yes.
thing. I do want to address the $1,500 bonus in building. That one, we had talked about giving Jean-Paul a raise greater than 3%.
That's what happened.
And so we
Oh,
put
that's
it
the
over in a
bonus.
bonus.
Okay.
In a bonus. That was
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And the remainder
Okay.
are contractual. So
yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Is there a motion to adopt ordinance 2014-04 or any other motion on the floor?
I move to adopt ordinance. I move to adopt the ordinance. Sorry. Is this working at all? Hello?
It is.
Yeah. Okay, you moved to adopt ordinance 1904?
Yes, I did.
Is there a second? I'll second it. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Mayor Troopman,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Samaria,
No.
Commissioner Johnson Sardella,
Yes.
Commissioner Tudor,
Yes.
Commissioner Wise?
Yes.
Motion passes 4-1. This concludes the item 4A for the first reading of ordinance 2019-04 to adopt a tentative budget for fiscal year 2019-2020, and that concludes the hearing. We will take a 5-minute recess. Now, is there a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second? Second. Public hearings are adjourned. We'll be back in 5 minutes.